In October 2022, 25-year-old Shanquella Robinson traveled to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, with a group of people she believed she could trust. Less than 24 hours after arriving, she was dead. The group claimed she had alcohol poisoning, but a video surfaced online showing one of them, Dejanay Jackson, violently attacking Shanquella while the others stood by.
In Charlotte, North Carolina, where family roots run deep and community ties often stretch back generations, Shanquella Robinson was a familiar presence. At just 25 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of someone older, yet she still radiated the youthful energy of a woman discovering the prime of her life. Her laughter was contagious, her smile magnetic, and she had the kind of natural warmth that drew people to her. To those who knew her best, she wasn't simply a friend or a daughter. She was the center of joy, the one who brought light into a room. She had grown up surrounded by love, her mother and family providing the foundation on which she built her dreams. In Charlotte, she attended school like any other child, but early on it was clear she had an entrepreneurial spirit. Even before most of her peers were thinking about careers, Shanquella was already setting herself apart with ambition. She found her niche in beauty and style, building a children's hair braiding business that quickly blossomed into a success. She had an eye for detail, a patience for her young clients, and a knack for marketing that helped her business spread by word of mouth. Parents trusted her, children adored her, and in time, she became known as one of the most reliable and creative stylists in her community. Her success as a young entrepreneur gave her independence and freedom. She wasn't tied down to a 9-to-5, and she thrived on the satisfaction of running her own show. She poured her creativity into her work, but she also poured it into her personal life, in the way she dressed, in the way she decorated her space, in the way she celebrated life itself. Shanquella was the type of woman who made birthdays, dinners, and vacations memorable, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Family was at the center of it all. Her mother described her as loving, generous, and fiercely loyal. Shanquella made time for family gatherings, never too busy to show up for the people who mattered most. She was a devoted daughter, a supportive friend, a woman who carried her heart on her sleeve. Her parents often said she had been a blessing from the moment she was born, someone destined to make others happy. By 2022, Shanquella was thriving. At 25, she was young, beautiful, and financially secure enough to travel, to enjoy the fruits of her hard work. She surrounded herself with friends, some from childhood, some newer connections, all part of the circle that filled her days with companionship. Among them were the people she would travel with to Mexico, a trip that was supposed to be one more adventure in a life full of celebrations. The plan was Cabo San Lucas, one of Mexico's glittering coastal escapes where tourists flocked for beaches, nightlife, and luxury villas. For young Americans, Cabo was the kind of destination that carried both prestige and promise. It was a place to unwind, to take Instagram photos that shimmered with sun and ocean, to live, even for a weekend. Like life was limitless, for Shanquella, the trip was exciting. She packed her bags with outfits meant for sand and sea, dresses for evenings, swimsuits for days by the pool. She was known for her style, and Cabo would be her runway. But more than that, she saw the trip as a chance to relax, to bond with friends, to laugh and play and carry memories back home. She didn't know, as she prepared, that the trip would become the last chapter of her life. In the days before leaving, she spent time with her family, unaware of how precious those moments would become. Her mother later recalled how nothing seemed unusual, how Shanquella was happy and full of anticipation. There was no warning sign, no shadow hanging over her. She was 25, vibrant, successful, and on her way to a weekend that should have been filled with nothing but fun. When she boarded her flight in late October 2022, she was stepping into what seemed like another of life's joyous adventures. She traveled with a group of 6 friends, people she believed she could trust, people she had let into her circle. They had rented a villa in Cabo, a lavish space with white walls and ocean views, the kind of place where young adults could feel like royalty. The villa promised privacy and luxury, the backdrop for laughter, music, and relaxation. For Shanquella's family back home, the trip seemed ordinary. Young people traveled all the time, and Cabo was hardly unusual as a destination. They expected photos, videos, calls perhaps, the usual signs that their daughter was enjoying her trip. Nothing about the plan suggested danger. Nothing suggested betrayal. But in hindsight, those days before the trip carried a weight her family could not have imagined. They were the last moments of normalcy, the last time they would see Shanquella alive, the last time her laughter would fill their home. The Robinson family would later say that if they had known what awaited their daughter in Cabo, they would have begged her not to go. But life doesn't work with warnings. Shanquella walked into her destiny with excitement, with trust, and with the belief that she was surrounded by friends. She had no way of knowing that within 24 hours of arriving, her life would be stolen. Her story turned into one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of recent years. For now, though, in those last days of October, she was just Shanquella Robinson, 25, a business owner, a daughter, a friend, a woman on her way to a vacation. She was the very picture of life itself. When Shanquella Robinson and her companions arrived in Cabo San Lucas on October 28, 2022, everything seemed like the start of a dream vacation. The sun washed the coastline in gold, the ocean shimmered under the afternoon light, and the villa they had rented was the kind of place people back home would envy. It had high white walls, private rooms, an expansive living area, and an outdoor pool that looked out toward the horizon. It was the kind of place meant for laughter, cocktails, and photos destined for Instagram stories. For Shanquella, the first hours in Cabo carried the excitement of escape. She was with friends, or at least people she thought were her friends. They settled into the villa, unpacking, taking photos, setting the stage for the weekend ahead. Shanquella had packed carefully, bringing outfits she had chosen with intention. To her, a trip was not just about location, but about the joy of living beautifully, of capturing moments in style. But beneath the surface of the group's dynamic, something was wrong. Shanquella had not sensed it in time, but tensions were brewing. Some of those who came on the trip harbored envy, resentment, or private grievances. What should have been a celebration would instead devolve into betrayal. The night passed with drinks, food, and chatter. But by the next day, October 29th, the mood shifted. Details of what exactly unfolded in the villa remained pieced together from fragments, conflicting testimonies, and one video that would later horrify the world. What is certain is that by that afternoon, less than 24 hours after she had arrived in Mexico, Shanquella Robinson was dead. Her travel companions told a simple story to her family. Shanquella had died of alcohol poisoning. They called her mother and delivered the explanation with certainty, repeating the words as though they believed them. Alcohol poisoning, a tragic but common enough occurrence on vacation. They spoke of her drinking, of her body shutting down, of an accident rather than violence. But the story didn't sit right with her mother, Salamandra. She knew her daughter, knew her habits, and the explanation rang hollow. Still, the initial reports left her stunned and searching for answers. Behind the scenes, the truth was darker. At some point in the villa, Shanquella had been attacked. A video later surfaced, leaked to the public, showing Shanquella being beaten by one of the women on the trip while others watched. In the video, she is naked, appearing disoriented, not fighting back. The attacker strikes her repeatedly while a man's voice off camera taunts her, asking, "At least fight back." The video is short, grainy, and devastating. For those who knew and loved Shanquella, watching it was unbearable. It revealed not only that she had been assaulted, but that those she trusted had not intervened. They had filmed. The video destroyed the alcohol poisoning narrative. It showed premeditated violence, humiliation, cruelty. Shanquella wasn't the victim of a tragic accident. She was the victim of betrayal and brutality. In Mexico, the initial response was muddled. Doctors were reportedly called to the villa, but conflicting accounts exist about how much medical care she received. Some reports suggest a local doctor attempted to revive her, while others imply that her companions resisted involving authorities fully, hoping to contain the situation. By the time officials arrived, Shanquella was gone. The autopsy, performed by Mexican authorities, told the story her companions would not. Shanquella had suffered severe spinal cord injury and a dislocated atlas vertebra in her neck. These were not injuries caused by alcohol. They were injuries consistent with violent physical assault. The autopsy concluded her death was the result of these injuries, not poisoning. Back in Charlotte, Salamandra Robinson struggled to reconcile the lies she had been told with the truth revealed in the autopsy. She knew then that her daughter had been murdered, and she knew that those who had returned from Cabo, people who had sat in her home, offering condolences, repeating the alcohol story, were hiding something. When the fight video leaked online weeks later, the case exploded into the public consciousness. People across the country, and soon around the world, watched the horrifying footage. Outrage poured across social media, especially in Black communities, where Shanquella's name became a rallying cry. Hashtags like #JusticeForShanquella trended for weeks. Celebrities shared her story, demanding accountability. The video was undeniable proof that a crime had been committed, and yet the companions who had traveled with her walked free, back in the United States, untouched by charges. The betrayal cut deepest of all. Shanquella had trusted these people enough to travel with them, to share space in a foreign country. They had returned without her, lied to her family, and left her behind in Mexico. The cruelty of their abandonment shocked even seasoned true crime followers. For Salamandra, the grief was layered with rage. She had lost her only daughter, but she also faced a system that seemed unwilling to act. The Mexican authorities classified the case as a femicide, a gender-based crime under their law. They issued an arrest warrant for at least one of the individuals present in Cabo, but the United States government did not move to extradite. The FBI conducted its own review, but months later announced there was insufficient evidence to prosecute under U.S. jurisdiction. What should have been a clear case, a young woman, beaten on video, autopsy confirming broken neck and spine, was stalled between two nations, two systems, two sets of laws. For the Robinson family, it felt like Shanquella's death was being treated as expendable, a tragedy unworthy of justice. The Cabo trip, meant to be a joyful escape, had turned into one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in recent memory. And the people who knew what had happened, the so-called friends who had been there, remained silent. The days after the release of the fight video were unlike anything Shanquella's family had ever experienced. They were already grieving, their hearts shattered by the loss of a daughter who had been their joy. But now, with the entire world watching the video of her assault, their grief turned into a public battle. It was no longer just their tragedy. It was a case that had gripped the nation, sparking outrage, speculation, and demands for answers. In Mexico, authorities quickly announced that Shanquella's death was being investigated as a femicide, a crime that, under Mexican law, carries weight beyond the category of homicide. Femicide recognizes violence committed against women because of their gender, and Mexican officials made it clear they believed Shanquella had been murdered. By November 2022, just weeks after her death, prosecutors in Baja California Sur issued an arrest warrant for one of the women on the trip, widely believed to be the individual seen in the video attacking Shanquella. For Shanquella's family, the announcement brought both relief and frustration. Relief because at least one government had acknowledged that her death was not an accident, not alcohol poisoning, not a mystery, but a crime. Frustration because the warrant was issued in Mexico, while the suspects were safe on U.S. soil. They had flown home the day after Shanquella died, leaving her body behind, and once back in Charlotte, they faced no charges, no arrests, no accountability. Extradition was the word that dominated conversations. Would the United States send one of its citizens to Mexico to face charges for a crime committed abroad? Mexico asked. The paperwork was prepared, but months passed and nothing happened. The U.S. government did not extradite. Instead, the FBI announced it was opening its own investigation. At first, the Robinson family was hopeful. Surely the video, the autopsy, the lies told by her companions, surely all of it would lead to federal charges. They believed the FBI would deliver the justice they sought if Mexico could not. But in April 2023, months after Shanquella's death, the FBI released its decision. No charges would be filed in the United States. They explained that after reviewing evidence, including the autopsy conducted in Mexico, they had determined there was insufficient proof under U.S. law to bring a case. The explanation crushed Shanquella's family. To them, the evidence was overwhelming. Their daughter had a broken neck and spine. She had been assaulted on camera. She had been left to die in a villa while her so-called friends spun a lie about alcohol poisoning. What more did authorities need? The gap between Mexican and U.S. law became the chasm into which Shanquella's case fell. In Mexico, it was femicide. In the U.S., prosecutors said they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a federal crime had been committed. The result was paralysis, a case everyone could see, yet one no court seemed willing to touch. The family refused to accept it. Shanquella's mother, Salamandra, became the face of the fight for justice. She spoke at rallies, gave interviews, and demanded accountability. She told the story again and again, how her daughter had been full of life, how she had trusted friends who betrayed her, how her death had been covered in lies. Each time, her voice carried the weight of a mother's grief and a mother's determination. Community leaders rallied around her. Civil rights activists demanded action. Celebrities amplified Shanquella's name, calling on the government to do more. The hashtag Justice for Shanquella stayed alive on social media, keeping pressure on officials, reminding the world that this case was not forgotten. Still, the silence from those who had been in Cabo was deafening. Not one of them spoke publicly to explain what had happened. Not one took responsibility. They lived their lives in the United States while Shanquella's family visited her grave. While her mother carried her absence like a weight she could never put down, the family also struggled with the contradictions. At first, Shanquella's companions had returned to Charlotte and comforted her mother with the alcohol poisoning story. They had sat in her home, eaten at her table, pretended to grieve alongside her. That betrayal, layered on top of the murder itself, left wounds that would never heal. Salamandra said she could not comprehend how people who had watched her daughter die could then face her and lie so convincingly. The more time passed, the more the case seemed trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory. Mexican prosecutors reiterated that they had done their part, that they had issued the arrest warrant, that they had prepared the extradition paperwork. U.S. officials maintained that they could not prosecute. Each side pointed to the other, and in the middle stood a grieving family, fighting to keep their daughter's name from slipping into silence. To many observers, the case revealed the cracks in international justice. When crimes cross borders, when suspects move between countries, when laws differ, accountability can vanish. Shanquella's death became a symbol of that failure. She had died abroad, and the very fact that the crime was international had given her killers cover. And yet, her family refused to let the world move on. They continued to demand that someone, somewhere, be held accountable. For them, it was not only about justice for Shanquella, but about justice for every Black woman whose case had been ignored, dismissed, or buried under excuses. Her name became part of a larger movement, a call for equality, a demand that her life be valued. By the end of 2023, no one had been arrested. No one had been extradited. No one had faced trial. The video still circulated online. The autopsy still sat in files. The lies still stung in her mother's memory. But the Robinson family still fought, still prayed, still spoke her name, because Shanquella Robinson had been more than a victim. She had been a daughter, a business owner, a vibrant young woman with a future ahead of her. And her mother would not allow the world to forget that. By the time 2023 gave way to 2024, Shanquella Robinson's name had become more than a headline. It had become a symbol. Her story wasn't just about a young woman's life stolen in Cabo San Lucas. It was about betrayal, injustice, and the painful reality of how systems sometimes fail the very people they are meant to protect. Across America, and especially in Black communities, her name carried a weight that demanded recognition. In Charlotte, her mother carried that weight every single day. Salamandra Robinson had gone from a private figure, a woman devoted to her family, to a public voice for justice. She had never sought the spotlight, but tragedy had thrust her into it. She spoke for her daughter at rallies, interviews, and gatherings, always describing Shanquella not as a victim defined by violence, but as the vibrant, loving woman she had been. She wanted the world to know her daughter's spirit, her kindness, her business acumen, her generosity, not just the brutality of her final hours. Her voice echoed far beyond North Carolina. In Washington, D.C., activists marched with signs bearing Shanquella's name. In other states, vigils were held, candles lit, prayers said. The hashtag Justice for Shanquella continued to trend long after many stories fade. Proof that her case had struck a chord with millions who saw in her death both the personal tragedy of a mother's loss and The larger injustice of a system that seemed paralyzed. The fight for justice was not just about extradition or charges. It was about visibility. Shanquella's story exposed how Black women's deaths often receive less urgency, less investigation, less accountability. For many, the failure to arrest or extradite anyone was not just about international law. It was about a pattern of disregard. Shanquella became a rallying cry against that pattern, a name invoked in conversations about systemic inequities, about whose lives are valued in the pursuit of justice. The media continued to follow the case, but the tone shifted. At first, the coverage had been about the shocking video, the contradictions in the story, the outrage of the family. But as time passed without arrests, the story transformed into an indictment of international bureaucracy. News anchors asked, how can a crime caught on video, corroborated by autopsy, still end in silence? Opinion writers spoke of the invisible wall between U.S. and Mexican jurisdictions, and how that wall became a shield for those who had harmed Shanquella. Meanwhile, those who had been in Cabo with her lived their lives quietly, shielded from charges, protected by inaction. For the Robinson family, that fact was perhaps the most unbearable of all. To them, these individuals had watched their daughter die, had lied to them, had abandoned her body, and yet they had walked away free. The silence of those so-called friends became its own form of cruelty, a reminder of the betrayal that had cost Shanquella her life, despite the lack of legal progress. The cultural impact of Shanquella's case deepened. College students wrote essays about her. Podcasters dissected the timeline. True crime documentaries highlighted her story. Her name joined a growing list of young Black women whose deaths demanded attention: Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, Tamla Horsford, each case unique, yet each underscoring systemic patterns of dismissal. For Salamandra, the years ahead were not defined by surrender, but by persistence. She continued pressing lawmakers, speaking to community leaders, and demanding that her daughter's case remain on the national stage. She refused to let her daughter's memory be reduced to a statistic. Her persistence paid off in smaller but meaningful ways. Scholarships were created in Shanquella's name. Community events were dedicated to her. Her business legacy, the children's hair-braiding venture she had built with love and skill, inspired others to pursue entrepreneurship. Proof that Shanquella's spirit lived on through the people she had touched. And yet, the larger battle for justice remained unresolved. The extradition paperwork still sat unanswered. The FBI's decision not to prosecute still stung. The video still circulated online, its grainy footage a haunting reminder of betrayal. Shanquella's name still trended, but the courtroom where her killers should have stood remained empty. Her legacy became twofold. On one hand, she was remembered as the vibrant young woman she truly was, a daughter, friend, and entrepreneur. On the other, she became a symbol of justice delayed, of systems failing, of the need for change. For her family, the personal remained most important. They visited her grave, kept her photos alive, spoke her name daily. They remembered the laughter, the joy, the moments before Cabo, before betrayal, before her life was cut short. They knew that no amount of public recognition could bring her back, but they also knew that keeping her memory alive was the only way to honor her. And so, Shanquella Robinson's story endures. Not because justice was delivered, but because her family refused to let it fade. Not because her killers were held accountable, but because her mother's love has carried her name across the nation. Not because her case was solved, but because it exposed truths that could not be ignored. Shanquella was more than a victim. She was a bright light, extinguished too soon. But her flame continues to burn in the fight for justice, in the love of her family, and in the voices of those who demand that her story be heard. Her case remains unresolved, but her impact is undeniable. Shanquella Robinson will never be forgotten.